secrets they keep. Who knew the South could hold such lore? Wicked tales on every floor. Sweet home Alabama, not so sweet no more. History's a wild one, crime galore. Through the hills and the haunted pines, truth gets twisted in the lines.
Jamie here. Welcome to the Speakeasy. Today we'll be going into a book we haven't done in a while, Wicked North Alabama by Jacquelyn Procter Reeves. And today we'll be talking about the cold-blooded murder of Dr. Jack Wilson. This happened in 1992, and it was a big deal in North Alabama. People still talk about it today, so stay tuned. All right, Cold-Blooded Murder, the death of Dr. Jack Wilson. On May 22nd, 1992, 55-year-old Dr. Jack Wilson, a popular Huntsville ophthalmologist, left his office on White Sport Circle and made his way up Garth Mountain to his two-story home on the Boulder Circle cul-de-sac. The high-end homes in the southeast neighborhood were well-maintained and beautifully landscaped. Dr. Wilson's brick home was, in comparison to those around it, rather average. There were no particular outstanding features. It sat on a desirable wooded lot, however, and the neighborhood of professionals was quiet. Dr. Wilson intended to finish packing for a trip he was taking with his wife Betty to Santa Fe. They planned to spend a week sightseeing and enjoying good Mexican food in the high desert of New Mexico. When he arrived at home, Dr. Wilson changed his clothes, puttered around a little, and then decided to stake a campaign sign in his front yard for their friend Tim Morgan, who was in the race for Madison County District Attorney. Dr. Wilson found a metal baseball bat, which he used to pound the sign into the ground. When he finished, he walked back inside the house, carrying the bat with him. At 9:30 p.m., a police dispatcher received a call from Dr. Wilson's neighbor. Summoning police and an ambulance to 2700 Boulder Circle, Officer Jim Donegan was the first to arrive at the home. The dispatcher informed him that there was a possible robbery in progress, and he approached the house cautiously. A light was on in the garage and the front door was ajar. He stepped inside with his pistol in his hand. He glanced quickly into the rooms on the first floor, and he made his way up the stairs. Donegan saw a man lying on his back in a bloody mess on the upstairs landing. The man was wearing khaki slacks, a polo shirt, and socks, but no shoes. He did not move. Not knowing if the attacker was still in the house, Donegan backed down the stairs and called for more police, as well as paramedics. A thorough search revealed that no one else was in the house and confirmed that what he already suspected. Dr. Jack Wilson was dead. An autopsy revealed gruesome details of the doctor's final moments. He had been hit 9 times with the baseball bat. 6 of the blows fractured his skull, and his shoulder blade had been broken by another blow. Defensive wounds were present too. Both forearms bore broken bones, and there were 3 fractures in his hands. He had been stabbed twice. According to the autopsy results, he was already near death at the time he was stabbed. In addition, a bone in his neck had been broken, indicating strangulation. Jack's wife of 14 years, Betty, discovered her husband's body. She had arrived home after a day of shopping, followed by an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. She dropped her shopping bags and her purse as soon as she saw her husband's lifeless body, and ran from the house to a neighbor's. She was understandably hysterical and was not much help to police trying to investigate the murder scene. Betty told police that she thought her husband must have surprised a burglar. Dr. Wilson's wallet was lying by his body. His cash was gone, but there were several credit cards still inside. Something else seemed unusual. Valuables were all accounted for. No drawers had been ransacked. Mrs. Wilson's jewelry was where she had left it, and there were several guns, popular among thieves because they were easy to sell, in plain sight and untouched. Yet a box that had contained a pistol, hidden in Mrs. Wilson's bedroom, was found empty. Stranger still, the phone line in Dr. Wilson's bedroom had been cut. Dr. Jack Wilson was well known in the Huntsville community and very well liked, even by those who did not understand his quirky nature. When a patient could not pay his bill, Dr. Wilson might say that he would forgive it in return for homemade oatmeal cookies with raisins, or set up a 100-year payment plan, knowing that he would probably not see a dime. He was generous that way, yet frugal with his own money. Jack was a native of Chicago and had served during the Vietnam War and loved the military enough to want to make it a career. But when he was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, he was discharged from the military. Jack and his first wife, Julia, moved to Huntsville with their 3 children in July of 1968. His business took off, but his marriage did not. In the mid-1970s, he and Julia were divorced. Still, he kept his strange sense of humor and was known for his peculiarities. He set up elaborate practical jokes and put an ad in the newspaper announcing that his office would be closed for the annual eye exam of Elvis Presley. Although his strange brand of humor didn't always find appreciative audience, no one denied that he was an outstanding doctor and cared for his patients. And then there was his second wife, Betty. Betty was born on July 14th, 1945, and raised in nearby Gadsden. Gadsden has the crazy people over that way. There are always the murderers over that way, okay? But anyway, she had a twin sister named Peggy. They were not identical. In fact, they were very different. Yet, like most twins, they were cosmically close. They both married shortly after high school and then divorced. Betty had 3 boys, but when the youngest was only 10 months old, she packed up her belongings, left the boys with their father, and moved to Huntsville to pursue a nursing career. She was known as quite a party girl to the residents of her Huntsville apartment complex, as well as at the hospital where she worked. She met Jack Wilson and turned on the charm. Her friends knew that she was after a doctor, and before long they were married. After Dr. Wilson's surgery in 1982 to attach an ostomy bag. Ostomy. I don't know that word. I should have looked it up, but to see how to pronounce it, but I didn't. Betty sent him to a separate bedroom. She began to bring one-night stands to their home for sex, with her husband's blessing, according to Betty. And what did he get in return? He once commented that all that money was good for was getting a pretty wife. He drove used cars. She drove a new Mercedes. And her backup car was a BMW. He refused office envelopes while she wore an $8,000 Rolex. She had plastic surgery and her makeup was tattooed on. It was Jack's job to make more money than she could spend, and her job was to spend more than he could make. Her spending habits annoyed him considerably, but her caustic verbal abuse towards him made him bite his tongue most of the time. While investigators were busy looking into clues relating to Dr. Wilson's gruesome murder, police received an odd call from detectives in Shelby County. A woman there had met a man who claimed that he would pay $5,000 to kill the husband of a twin in Huntsville. And the murder victim was a doctor. Preposterous as the story sounded, it seemed more than a little coincidental. Detectives checked to see if Betty might have a twin sister, and suddenly it appeared that the case had solved itself. James White was picked up in Vincent, Alabama, 4 days after Dr. Wilson's death. He was a drug addict, had a felony record and psychiatric problems, and his work history was sketchy at best. White admitted that he knew Betty Wilson's twin sister, Peggy Lowe, because he had done carpentry work in her classroom and then at home. He was supposed to do some work for Peggy's sister Betty in Huntsville. He was in love with Peggy. He said he had had an affair with her and would do anything she asked. White was questioned by Huntsville investigators and brought to Huntsville, where he confessed to the murder in exchange for leniency. Even though he knew details of the crime, he lacked credibility. His version of the murder changed with every telling, and no one knew what to believe. In the meantime, Peggy Lowe and Betty Wilson were staying in the Huntsville home of their older sister, while police continued their investigation. Excuse me. Their brother-in-law heard that James White had been arrested for murder and rushed to knock on the door to the guest room to tell them the great news. Their reaction was not at all what he expected. It seemed odd to him that they didn't make any comment whatsoever. In spite of James White's wobbly, inconsistent confession, parts of it made sense. White had driven to Huntsville once before to commit the murder, but when he arrived, he discovered that Betty's son was at the house. He turned around and went back to Vincent. Betty insisted, through Peggy, that the murder be completed before their trip to Santa Fe. But he told Peggy that he couldn't do it because he didn't have a weapon. On Wednesday, May 20th, Peggy called White to tell him that that they had the tool for the job. The two sisters met him in a remote location to give him a .38 Smith & Wesson revolver. When police asked him later why didn't he use the weapon, his answer was simple. He disliked guns ever since his stint in Vietnam. White told police that he had been advanced $2,500 for the murder. He paid some bills, caught up somewhat on his child support, and frittered away the rest. As the day of the murder grew near, he needed more money for expenses. So Betty told him to go to the front desk at Gunnersville State Lodge, where she was attending a retreat sponsored by Alcoholics Anonymous. She had paid $200 into a library book entitled, she had put $200 into a library book entitled The Sleeping Beauty and the Firebrand, checked out of the Huntsville Madison County Library, and left it for him. On May 22nd, the day of the murder, Betty left a paper bag with more money in it at a fast food restaurant in the Parkway City Mall. She then gave White a ride to her house and unlocked the door and let him inside to wait for Jack Wilson. Betty left the house and waited. They had agreed ahead of time that she would call her house, and if White had finished the job, he would pick up the phone and hang it up. She called every few minutes while White waited for Jack to come home. James White nearly lost his nerve and left. Dr. Wilson came home later than expected because he was getting caught up at the office before his trip out of town. While going up the stairs, he was confronted by his killer. They struggled, and Dr. Wilson put up quite a fight. But he was a small, frail man, and in the end, his struggle was not enough. Betty called again, and this time White picked up the phone. She rushed home and picked up White. He crouched down in the seat so that no one would see him. In her haste to take White back to his truck, Betty caused a neighbor to swerve her car to avoid a collision. White drove back to Vincent, Alabama, and like most criminals who get caught for committing crimes, he couldn't keep his mouth shut. This proved to be his undoing, because there was nothing to link any of the three to the crime scene besides his admission of guilt. On Tuesday, May 26, Jack Wilson's funeral was held. Peggy Lowe was supposed to return to Vincent that day and leave the final $2,500 for White in a box in her garage. But before that could happen, Shelby County authorities picked him up for questioning. Within a few days, Betty took $85,000 out of the joint account she had with Jack and set up her own account just in case. Peggy and Betty were picked up by the police and charged with murder. Huntsville was stunned. Those who knew Betty Wilson, however, were not. As much as people loved her husband, they disliked Betty. She was abrasive and demanding. She slept around and despised her husband, and yet she mentored new members of Alcoholics Anonymous with kindness and care. Huntsville attorney Charlie Hooper headed a team of attorneys hired to defend Betty. Mark Sandlin would defend her sister Peggy. Peggy was released on a $150,000 bond, but Betty was denied bail. Jack's three sons took legal action to prevent Betty from receiving her inheritance until after her trial, and of course only if she received an acquittal. Furthermore, she was required to restore the cash she had removed from their joint bank account. It was decided that the sisters would be tried separately, and due to intense media coverage, Judge Thomas Younger granted a change in venue. On February 23, 1993, Betty Wilson's trial began at the courthouse on Greensboro Avenue in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. The state attorney general assigned Limestone County District Attorney Jimmy Fry to prosecute the case. It seemed that the entire case hinged on the effectiveness of James White to convince the jury of Betty's role. But because his story waffled so much, it would be difficult. Fortunately, White's 9 months in jail forced him to dry out, and perhaps his thinking was a little clearer. Betty's team of defense lawyers evolved and grew. The legendary Georgia attorney Bobby Lee Cook was hired. He was reputed to be one of the best criminal attorneys in the United States. Joseph Colquitt and Jack Drake of Tuscaloosa joined the team as well. Madison County Judge Thomas Younger, who granted the change of venue, presided over the trial. Prosecutor Jimmy Fry carefully questioned James White to establish his credibility as a witness. But defense attorney Bobby Lee Cook went on the offensive to discredit White's testimony. He asked White about the change of clothing found under a rock at the Wilson residence sometime after the murder. White admitted that the bag contained the clothing he had worn to commit the murder. He also said that it had been put there later, implying that it was done by Betty or Peggy. A knife was found with the clothing, but water had seeped into the plastic grocery bag and compromised everything inside. Even though White ran fast and loose with the truth, he remained relatively calm and unshaken on the stand under the grueling questioning of defense attorney Bobby Lee Cook. Prosecutors rebounded when they brought in a number of witnesses to corroborate White's testimony and coincide with the timeline leading up to the murder. Others were brought in to describe how Betty frequently spoke to her husband condescendingly. In her defense, Betty's son testified, as did her sister Peggy and Peggy's husband. Finally, the testimony was over. On March 2nd, 1993, the jury began to deliberate on Betty Wilson's fate. After 11 hours, the jury returned a verdict of guilty. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. 6 months later, Peggy Lowe was tried for the same crime in Montgomery before another judge from Madison County, Judge William Page. Attorney General Don Valesca prosecuted Peggy. She was defended by David C. Johnson of Birmingham and Herman Watson of Huntsville. While the spectators in Betty's trial were predominantly against her, most of the people at Peggy's trial, were there to support her. People from her church were there to pray for her and to show the jury that she was a good Christian woman. 9 days after the trial began, and less than 2.5 hours after the case went to the jury returned with an acquittal. In the end, everyone had an opinion about Betty's guilt. Nearly everyone believed that one sister could not be innocent and the other guilty. Either one of them was wrongly convicted or the other was wrongly acquitted. But there are many truths that may have factored into the jury's decision. Betty stood to gain most of Jack's $6 million estate. Her behavior, having her hairdresser brought from Huntsville to fix her hair for her appearance in court, and her blatant public distaste and humiliation for her husband, as well as her many sexual lesions, didn't garner much public sympathy. Most people in Huntsville assumed that Betty's sentence was just and that her sister Peggy got away with murder. There are still unanswered questions that will never be addressed. James White while admitting that he hit Dr. Wilson with a baseball bat, denied stabbing him with a knife. It was suggested that Betty came into the house and found her husband still alive, then finished him off with a knife. James White claimed that he had a fling with Betty Lowe and even described her underwear. He also said that the plan was to take Peggy's husband out on the lake in a boat and stage an accident in which he would drown. Not long after Peggy's acquittal, she and her husband quietly divorced. James Dennison White, born March 4th, 1951, is incarcerated in western Alabama town of Hamilton. Prisoner number 174225 lives in the Hamilton Aged and Infirmed Facility. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. However, no parole date is listed. Betty Wilson, prisoner number 171316, lives at Tutwiler State Prison. Her appeals have been exhausted, and the family home where Dr. Jack Wilson died sold only days after it was put on the market. Huntsville resident Bill Campbell fell in love with Betty, and they were married at Tutwiler Prison on May 1st, 2006. Perhaps no contemporary Huntsville murder has elicited more speculation and discussion than that of Dr. Jack Wilson. The story has all the markings of a salacious novel, along with a who's who of well-known local names. Betty had always claimed that she was convicted not because she hired someone to kill her husband, but because it was revealed during her trial that she had an affair with a black man. In other words, her assertion is that the bigotry of the jury was greater than the evidence against her. Not true. Her accusation is an insult to the intelligence of the jury that found her guilty of murder, as well as the people of Alabama. Yeah, she was guilty, and so was her sister. I believe her sister got away with murder. But they were from Gadsden. The people out there, I mean, you have a lot of people out that way that murder. You have the giggling granny. You know, I did a video on her. There was one of them that was crazy. They called her the Black Widow, and she poisoned her husband. She poisoned her husband's mother, her own mother and father, probably, I think. She tried to poison her daughter. I might do a video on her one day. She was really, really evil, okay? But so were these two right here, Peggy Lowe and Betty Wilson. They were evil too. All right, hope you enjoyed. See you back soon.